Good morning. Let me just, before I start, I'll say that when I'm done, you can also ask some questions if you'd like, because, it's better to do it that way. I don't like this kind of come in, give a statement, go off. And so anyway, what are they title? Do they give me? Well, okay.
President.
No, I meant the title of the talk. Well, I'm going to talk about a lot of things today, this morning, and the idea is to talk about actually this interface between geekdom and society and governance, and where we could go with that. Maybe some of the problems that we face in here, some of the real conflicts, theoretical or philosophical. But for me, at least, I'll start just with a personal story, which is that for me, the whole idea of e-governance, the internetization of society, was, or at least computers and society, has been for me a long-term concern, and I mean long-term from way before Estonia became independent. My personal story is that since I learned to program at that time BASIC when I was 13 because of a very bright math teacher, and then later on because having learned to program at 13 when I was in university, it wasn't really very difficult to switch over and learn hexadecimal assembler, and I managed to pay my way through university doing that, never being a computer scientist. It seemed like an elementary skill, just like any other language. And so since I had that, I always thought it was just something useful and not something restricted to people who are math whizzes, but you can even be a softie like me and actually know how to use computers, and if you think logically, it's actually a no-brainer, and that you could do all kinds of interesting things. Now, that was back in 1968 to 1976. When Estonia became independent, like many people from then and to this day, we're all worried, what's going to happen to us? We're such a small country. On top of that, we have 50 years of Soviet occupation and a complete and utter backwardness in the standard measures of advancement, that is infrastructure, physical infrastructure, concrete, bridges, roads, overpasses, all that stuff we had basically been left behind. One area where we've really been left behind is in anything relating to sort of modern communication technology. This city of Tallinn, which installed in 1938 or so a rotary telephone system, it was one of the most advanced at the time. Yes. We still used it. We still had a rotary telephone connection with all the brass connections all worn out, because if you know how you don't even know what a rotary phone is anymore, but anyway, you dial and then there would be an analogous number of clicks, and then it would make the connection in a central station somewhere. And so I started thinking about what we needed to do, and this was about the time, this was actually the same year Mosaic came out. And with Mosaic out, I mean the first browser, primitive as it was, we saw that people were beginning to use email. And I also knew that Estonians had a lot of geeks among them, or that there were a lot of people, because a lot of the computer technology and some of the thinking about computers in the Soviet Union had come from Estonia. I said, okay, we have the brains, we have this new technology, and actually we're on a level playing field. So while everyone was treating us as a backward former Soviet republic, we were at the same place as anyone else. And so I thought, well, this is actually our opportunity to develop. And so 93, 94, I thought a lot about what we were doing, where we should be going. I had a lot of fights with people because I was in Washington and they were here. And it was clear that the technology of the time or rather, we should be using technology as best as possible. I remember having a huge fight with a number of people over the phone because the city of Helsinki offered us a free telephone exchange because the city of Helsinki was sort of getting rid of its 1970 vintage analog phone system and saying, okay, we're going to digitize, and we'll give you poor backward Estonians, we're going to give you for free our 1970s exchange. And then everyone was very happy because we were getting something for free. And I said, no, we cannot do that. Because soon as if we take in legacy technology, we will be stuck for a long time. Just as a result of the Versailles Treaty, when the German industrial plant was stripped by the Allies and the Brits and the French, and mainly the Brits and the French, got themselves 1890s German technology, and the Germans had no industrial plant, so they started all over again. And then they had 1923 technology in Germany after World War II, when the Brits and French were using German 1890s technology. I said, this is what's going to happen to us if we take all this stuff for free. So we have to do it on our own. We need to digitize our phone system, which Estonia fortunately did very quickly, so I had a better telephone connection in 1993 between Washington and Tallinn than I did between the embassy and the State Department in Washington, D.C. That wasn't a political statement, that was purely technological. Anyway, so that was one thing. And the other thing I thought about where I was really sort of kicked in that we can use technology to develop is that I read this Marxist Luddite book called The End of Work, even translated into Estonian as Töölõpp, by Jeremy Rifkin, arguing that technology is really bad, and the more we computerize, the fewer jobs we would have. The more we automatize, the fewer jobs we would have. I mean, it was basically a sort of 1994 version of Ludd, Alan, whatever his first name was, Ludd, the Luddite movement that went around smashing mills in the early 19th century in England. And he had this great example, which was that if you, there was a steel plant, I know some of you have heard this 3,000 times, but anyway, there was a steel plant in Kentucky that employed 12,000 people, and it produced X 100,000 tons of steel a year. Then the Japanese, they were rich at the time, came and bought the plant, and then they automatized it and computerized it. And then the plant, when it reopened, it still produced X 100,000 tons of steel, but whereas earlier 12,000 people had produced that amount of steel, now it was only 120. It was a completely automated plant. And of course, this was brought as an example of how terrible computerization and modern technology can be for jobs. But see, here in Estonia, we have this incredible angst. Aside from how do we rate, the other big angst we have is we're so small, we're so small, we're so small, we can't do anything. And I said, well, okay, that's true. We are so small in these economies of scale that that really in traditional industrial business models, we're in trouble. On the other hand, if 120 people can do the work of 12,000, produce the same amount because we're automatized and computerized, well, we can in fact use technology, IT, as a huge multiplier and increase our functional economic size multiple times. So that was kind of those are the pillars kind of getting to where we are. And then the next step was, I said, well, if we want to do that, then we have to broaden the use of IT. And besides, you're never going to convince old people to do anything. So we have to start with the kids. We have to get them using technology. And so the idea which we managed to push through the government was that all schools would be computerized and would be connected. Two important factors. How we did that is a different thing. It was quite a hat trick, but anyway, I won't get into that right now. But in any case, by 1997, all Estonians, or rather 1998, all Estonian schools, 100%, were online and had had computers for kids. And later on, we did all kinds of other things to get older people to do this. We had the business community took all this up and really liked it because they could in fact close all their regional banks, or rather local banks. Again, kind of a repeat of what Rifkin was talking about. What it meant was that in fact Estonian banks could be more efficient. Anyway, that was how this started. But what it kicked off was a trend in this country to look for technological IT solutions where other countries didn't really do it, partially because they were locked into legacy technology. A big factor was that they were locked into legacy technology. And also because there was this way of doing things that in which Estonians felt that they were at the cutting edge of something rather than simply copying other people, a very important psychological moment. And from there, things developed fairly quickly, and I mean, in terms of the development of e-governance, Ivar Tallo can talk about that later, and how, in fact, this became an integral part of governance in Estonia. But it got Estonia off in a different direction that I would argue today, looking back on it, is an important model of modernization. For all those countries that need to modernize, and there are a lot of those countries that need to modernize, beginning with the UK. And then, I'll get to that later. Okay, just an aside, last year the UK Minister for IT came to Estonia, and then he spent 3 days here, and he looked at everything we're doing, and then he said, then we had a lunch, and he said, could you send us a guy for 2 months to tell us how to do things? I said, sure. Well, I mean, you know, yeah, if you want. So we seconded someone for 2 months to the UK, and that was in August of last year. He's still there. So, I mean, which is fairly unique because we never had the fortune of being colonized by the UK. I mean, we're colonized by some other nastier people, but in any case, if you talk to people who have been colonized, they can't believe it because the UK would never learn anything from a poor WOG country like ours, but now they have a very progressive government. So, but what we see today is that, to move on from how it all started, is that the digitized world we are in today is so radically different, so completely different from society and everything before it, that we really have to start looking very seriously at all of the various processes that have come out of as a result of digitization of society. You know, when it took a while for people to figure out that once you have a steam engine and you can produce more things, that was the first realization, and that was the Industrial Revolution. But it really took a while for people to actually understand what that meant for society. Same way, I mean, as long as people were talking about internal combustion engines, and as long as people, in the beginning of the 20th century, some people had cars, but it was kind of a novelty, the impact of this new mode of transportation over the horse didn't really have much meaning to people. It was only after the car or the automobile became widespread that suddenly society began to be transformed. Suddenly you had suburbs. There were never suburbs before there were cars, because why would you live outside of the city? It was after the car began to be mass produced that you suddenly had something that had never existed before. Overpasses. I mean, before you had bridges over a river, yes, but I mean, you didn't have one road going this way and another road going that way. You didn't have access from far away to centers. You didn't have the distribution networks. People living in the countryside generally were far behind in sort of all kinds of levels of development. And so we are in more or less in the same situation that we have gone from, well, I mean, we have now basically, well, I don't know how it is in your country, but in our country, basically, everyone's connected. Okay, everyone's connected, everyone has access to a computer, whether they own it or not, but they are connected. Now that that part is done, that means basically we're at the stage where everyone has a Model T Ford. But what this means for society, we don't know yet. And that's one of the things. But we can already see that society is completely different from the way it was even in 1992 when I was reading, or 93 when I was reading Jeremy Rifkin. Today, I mean, could you imagine what your life would be like if you did not have an iPad, a computer, or a smartphone? I mean, it's just as I couldn't understand as a kid how people lived without television, and looked at my parents and thought they were cave people. I mean, today, I mean, my kids, I mean, they go, what? What's a fixed line phone? You know, what was life like before there was a computer? I mean, what did you do? So, I mean, things have really changed. And again, I don't think we've given enough attention to where we are going. A lot of things are becoming clear in this mist of change. And I'd like to talk about some of those different areas and how Estonia is a part of that. In all of the various areas that have come out of the new technology, I'm proud that Estonia has been one of the best. Not only in sort of the technological side of having schools connected far before anyone else, but in all kinds of other secondary derivative areas such as internet freedom, where Estonia, well, let's put it this way, number 3 is Germany in internet freedom. Number 2 is the United States in internet freedom. Number 1. And these issues, as we have seen, between trolling, between censorship, between online hate speech, I mean, these are all these secondary, new, and fundamentally important issues that we have been dealing with here for some time already, that are also part of the scheme that we have to deal with. Then there are third areas where we can do something altogether different, one of which I would say is probably one of the most successful cases of civil society empowerment that has ever taken place thanks to technology, which is something that was developed here, that we invented here in Estonia. There was a sort of a group work between Greens, or green thinking people, and some of the founders of Skype, and a very sort of high-level IT-based logistics company here. One of the problems we have in Estonia, probably morally, as a result of sort of the attitude in the Soviet Union, is I'll just throw my garbage anywhere. But we do have these in forests, in all kinds of places. We have people throw garbage. And plus the fact that when we became capitalist again, people had to pay for garbage removal, so they didn't want to pay the money, so they would take their garbage and throw it somewhere. So we have all these piles of garbage. Now, I mean, this is not a problem unique to Estonia. I mean, you have it even in sort of, I mean, I remember you have it in the US, you have it in Germany. One of the things that cleanup campaigns have been a long-time feature in the societies. And people get together and they go to one place and they clean up. And they take the garbage away. But then these people here in Estonia decided, well, why don't we use technology to help us? And so 2 of the founders of Skype, which of course is, you know, developed here, you all know that, decided, well, we can build an app by which using your smartphone, you can take a picture of garbage, I mean, in the forest or somewhere, and then it'll automatically relay the picture and the GPS coordinates of where the garbage is, and then combined with some other technology on logistics, you can organize when a truck will go to pick something up and sort of what is the route of the truck to pick up different spots. And so they put this all together, and on one day there was this massive cleanup campaign. 30,000 people were involved all over the country. Huge amounts of garbage were picked up. And that never would have happened if we did not have smartphones. That never would have happened if we did not have the software to, in fact, do that. And it was the first year, 6 years ago, it was called Let's Do It. last year, 6 million people in 96 countries using this same technology did it all over the world. This is an example, and this is strictly a voluntary civil society action. People come out, they say, I want to clean up my environment. I'm going to participate in this. I download the app on my smartphone. I help find the garbage. Then when you go to what place to go help clean up, and when the garbage truck comes, and all of this is done and could never have been done before and never been done on a worldwide scale. These are the kinds of things that can change society dramatically, and I would argue that this is something that is part of our future. I mean, I cannot even begin to imagine all the kinds of things we can do with this, but it is all possible. And so what we see today is that from going from a non-digital society with no hardware, no software, and a completely different form of communication, we have not only, as all of you already nodded your heads, we live in a world in which we cannot imagine living without this technology, and we are, at the same time can imagine all kinds of new things to do with this technology that is not only a matter of having Excel files and running your business hardware, but in fact it is of dramatic social importance. Now, of course, this is not everything in technology is good. As Yevgeny Morozov talks about, this is what I've been outlining is the solutionist approach. How many of you have read, click here, the new second book by Yevgeny Morozov? Yes? No one? No one's read it? Well, okay. So we shouldn't be, we shouldn't actually be constrained, or we shouldn't actually think that everything can be solved by using IT technology. That is a fallacy. On the other hand, in his first book, which was called Dangerous Internet, he talked about the issue that we see more and more today, which is that technology is not only about empowering people, it's not only about connecting people, it's also about new and improved versions of repression, new and improved versions of following your citizenry, of hacking into people. This is repressive governments. There's no reason to think that a repressive government is stupider than a progressive Western liberal democracy government. And in fact, as we have seen, you can harness technology in all kinds of ways, far more efficient ways to go after people than you could before. Before, it was fairly difficult to, it was, the poor Stalinists, they had to employ huge amounts of people to listen in on people's phone conversations. Today, you can just, and then you need a trained linguist to be able to if someone wants to listen in on an Estonian conversation, or you want to look at an Estonian's email, well, with only about 1 million speakers or writers, that's pretty, you have to train a KGB agent to be able to know the language. Today, it's really easy. First of all, you can hack into the conversations, you can hack into Skype, you can hack into their emails, and then you just use Google Translate. It's the way repressive governments in Russia, China, Iran, Belarus, we can go on and on, have been using modern technology to monitor their citizenry. Just all the old stuff just simply pales. George Orwell could never imagine so efficient a repressive system as is today possible. That was not possible before. So when we think about all this democracy and empowerment and how good it all is, we just have to keep in mind that the bad guys also can use it. And it's not only in the level of governments themselves, of inside your country, but in fact, you can also do this or at least this way, there are major attempts that have been going on for a while to actually limit the amount of freedom of expression on the net worldwide. The best example of this was the ongoing process with the ITU, which met in Dubai last year, where there was this serious attempt to impose rules on the internet. I mean, ostensibly to take it away from ICANN and the Americans, but the basic idea was that to impose their rules. Now, you know, one of the significant developments in the development of the state was the Treaty of Westphalia, which came up with this principle of cuius regio, cuius religio eius regio, which came out of this big war in Europe, one of the worst wars that ever took place, the most, actually percentage-wise, the most deadly war in European history, the 30 Years' War, and it was finally resolved. It was all a religious war, Catholics versus Protestants, Protestants versus Catholics, and the way it was resolved was that finally in the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, in Osnabrück actually, everyone got together and said, okay, the way we will resolve this is whatever the religion is, eius, cuius religio, or rather, I was right. Whatever is the religion of the king will be the religion of the country. So, cuius regio, who's the king, and eius religio, that will be the religion. So you have Bavaria is Catholic, Northern Germany is Protestant, Poland is Catholic, France is Catholic, Belgium versus Holland. Didn't really matter that the Flanders spoke the same language as the Netherlands. What mattered was that Flanders was Catholic, the rest of the Netherlands was Protestant. So you even have this bizarre split, which doesn't make any sense to us at all today in the day of, in the post-19th century nationalist era, that one people with the same language but different religions would have different countries. Now, what they're trying to do is impose the same principle, the Westphalian solution, on the internet. You don't have freedom of speech, but rather that, in fact, whatever country has whoever's king, those are the rules of the internet. And you can imagine what this will mean for free expression if all of this is extended to the rest of the world. And in fact, what's really sad is that most countries prefer to see some kind of serious control of the internet, and the number of countries that are in favor of freedom on the internet is too small. That's one conflict. That's another area, as aside from development, but the whole idea of free expression that we have to deal with, that again needs resolution in this new world as opposed to just coming up with new gadgets. Third area, which is very big, I would argue, it will become very big in Europe, are two fundamentally liberal democratic ways of looking at things that are coming more and more into conflict, and precisely because of the potential of the internet. I'm speaking longer than I should, but too bad. And that is privacy versus transparency. There are two good things. They're like apple pie, motherhood, the flag. One of them is privacy, and the other one is transparency. Geographically, it tends to be that the colder or worse your temperature, the more you're into transparency. So countries like mine, the Swedes, the Finns, the Danes, the UK, we kind of like transparency. In fact, we have this fundamental principle that every last publicly spent cent must be known and accountable. Now, in other countries, you have this idea that privacy is the most important thing, and no one should know anything about the private individual, which generally we also think is a good idea. But then you end up with these funny conflicts that in fact cost, well, I'll take one example. The EU budget over 7 years is about €1 trillion. Well, okay, 900 billion euros, that means in US dollars, if you're American, over $1 trillion. That's the budget of the EU. 40% of that money goes to agriculture. 40%. That's 400 billion, over $400 billion, a little less than 400 billion euros. A huge amount of money. Now, until 5 years ago, that was all secret. You never knew where that money went. I mean, of course, this drove people up here nuts because, you know, where's all this money going? We're paying for it. Someone's getting it. We don't know who's getting it. And then finally, a coalition of countries from the north pushed through this thing that was then done by an Estonian, Siim Kallas, that all cap funds must be publicly known, where they go, who gets them. And then, and that it was that way for 2 years. But in the meantime, the southern countries took the commission to court and said this is a violation of privacy. They won the court case, and so today we again don't know. In this era of complete and utter financial disaster in Europe, we don't know where 400 billion euros go. Who gets it, for what, all in the name of privacy. So we're going to be I mean, this is an issue I predict, especially when we get to cloud computing, as we get to new directives on privacy and on the internet and so forth. We're going to see more and more of an intellectual, moral conflict between two fundamental liberal democratic values. And when that happens, we don't know what will happen, but we need a lot more intellectual work on this, folks. And this is my third case of what we need in order to move ahead with the technology and the way it has revolutionized our life. A fourth area, which I don't have to go into too much, but nonetheless, where technology has changed everything, is security, warfare, and all of those bad and good things. We have, because of our technology, we are now in an era where, in fact, you don't need an army. Well, you do need an army for the sort of primitive stuff, but you can take over a country without an army, and you can render the most modern army in physical terms. You know, all their tanks, the F-35 as yet to come into use, strike, whatever, fighter that the US has, battle carrier groups, all of that, by simply you can just turn it into legacy technology. Back in the old days, back in the days of Westphalia, back in the days of World War II, back in the days of the Iraq War, you needed guns, boots on the ground. Today, if you want to take over a country, you don't have to do that with a single soldier, at least inside the territory of the country. Because today, if you really want to immobilize a country, all you have to do is knock out its critical information or critical infrastructure. Now, that used to be true in the past, too. But then you have to use bombs. People had to fly planes. You had rockets that you had to send. Well, today, all of that critical infrastructure that is what you have to take over, and which is defended normally by troops, tanks, fighter planes, and bombers. Well, today, all of that, thanks to SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition systems, have to be reclassified as critical information infrastructure systems. Everything from the delivery of milk to your supermarkets, to the way your power system works, to whether you have a green light in front of you or a red light, all of it is done through self-regulation, through programs, all over the mediated by the internet. And so, if you want to paralyze a country today, you don't have to bomb it. You don't even have, you don't have to send troops in. But any country can be paralyzed from its electrical systems to its trains to the traffic lights, at least in countries where people observe traffic lights. You have to, you can just grind it to a halt. And you can do all the deliveries to your supermarkets, which are all done back in the old days when I was a child. You know, people would go around, mark down, do inventory, how much milk is there left, what do we have to order next week? I mean, now the tomato soup is running low. That doesn't work anymore. It's all done via SCADA systems, feedback loops, all over the internet. I read one case where you can actually program Xerox or a photocopying machine, so that when you're making a copy, it automatically sends a picture of what you've had copied to somewhere, to somebody. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, you think you're going to go copy something, and in fact, it also ends up in a server somewhere else. You can, using Bluetooth, stop a car if you want, because cars are so automated. The brake system is automated. You use Bluetooth to crank up the music playing in your car, but in fact, you've just turned on the brakes. All of this is new, and this means that security today has to be completely redefined. On top of which, what makes it even more difficult is that the two fundamental requirements of, say, Article 5 in NATO, which is that an attack gets an appropriate reciprocal attack. That is, if someone sends a missile and destroys your electrical plant, then you send back a missile or you bomb their electrical plant. You don't start a nuclear war. Well, today, we don't know who just bombed your nuclear plant. There is no missile whose trajectory you can follow. If suddenly your electrical plant doesn't work, you don't know why it doesn't work, you don't know who did it, and then what is the appropriate response to having your electrical system knocked out? We in Tallinn are coming up with certain answers to this at the NATO Cyber Center, our NATO Cyber Center of Excellence for Cyber War, and we've actually produced a book on this and how international law applies. So with all these areas where society has been completely transformed, governance has been transformed, countries that used to be poor have suddenly become far more advanced than countries that have, for a long time, have been rich, countries that are small, but that doesn't matter anymore, societal processes that in fact today that were impossible 10 years ago, today are becoming commonplace. Citizen action are becoming commonplace. I won't even get into this whole process we went through here in Estonia just a couple of months ago, where in fact online we sort of did this deliberative democracy attempt here, which we don't know how it will have worked out, but in any way, if I combining James Fishkin's deliberative democracy model, which is a very smart professor at Stanford who's developed a new way of reaching decisions, combine it with the IT possibilities of our two-factor authenticated PKI system that we use in Estonian government, but I should talk about that. All that, I mean, we suddenly put these things together, and we actually had, you know, sort of an active democracy debate in this country thanks to the possibilities of technology. And I should finally say one last thing about one other thing that has made Estonia work, and this is where poverty is actually a good thing. I mean, what we decided as I started out was that we would try to use the benefits of IT technology to solve problems that you can do more cheaply. And so the idea was to provide services, government services, online that used to be done by bureaucrats. This has one big advantage. If you get rid of the bureaucrat, well, let's put it this way, you can't bribe a computer. This is part of the transparency approach we're taking. But basically, it's good to be able to do things online. And the first thing we did was e-taxation, which was probably the one thing that allowed us to overcome citizen opposition to using computers, because if you get to do your taxes online and it's easy and it's fast and the numbers are added up automatically for you, and on top of that, the government is nasty enough that it says if you do it online, you get your refund immediately. If you do it on paper, you get it maybe someday in a few months. And so those things allowed people to start doing this. But the key to this was the architecture of the system. If you want people to trust what you have, you need to have a very secure system. And so the solution that these very smart people came up with, first of all, I mean, the thing was making sure your identity is you are who you are. This still remains the problem and will become more and more of a problem. If you live in a bad neighborhood, you have a house in or an apartment in a bad neighborhood, and all of the internet world is a bad neighborhood. It's full of very bad people. And so if you're in an apartment and your doorbell rings and you say, who's there? I mean, you through the intercom, and then you hear it's a familiar voice, it's me, honey. And you say, okay, come in. But today we have the moral equivalent of someone sitting there with a tape recording of your girlfriend or boyfriend saying, it's me, honey. And so when they rings the doorbell and then you say, who is it? And then you put your thing there and says, it's me. And then you say, oh, of course, I'll let you in. So we had to have something more secure than that. And so we have a secure identity here, which is guaranteed by an independent authentication center, which means that it is responsible for making sure you are you. It's done with 2 factors, not 1. All these people who use Visa or MasterCards online to buy things, and then you have a 3-digit security code. I never understand that. That's insane. Why anyone would trust that. And then it's done with a public key infrastructure. I assume that means something to most of you, with the system developed in the 1970s with a public key and a private key, and there's a binary key code. But if you don't know what that is, I won't go into it right now. The other thing that makes it work and trustworthy, and which I would argue is something we have to think much more about when it comes to big data and with cloud computing, is that back in those days, Estonia was too poor to have a big server, or a big server farm, where you put everything together and every ministry has its sort of section there. And so we just couldn't afford it. So basically you said, okay, what do we do now in order to have, the foreign ministry has its server, the taxation department has its own system, the police and so forth. I know, it's too bad. And so what we did was, so some very clever guy, which I know he was, I'd give him a medal, but anyway, decided it had to be an enterprise service bus, which allowed interconnections between the different servers, all of which communicated in a secure manner and with the same identification requirement as the citizen has. And the solution is that we have, I would argue, the most secure government service system anywhere in the world. And we also give it away free as part of our foreign aid package. We say, here's the system, it's open source, it's non-proprietary, use it, develop it, and then Microsoft makes money developing it. Anyway, time is up. I have to quit. Let me just say that, just at the end, this is why we have this idea of actually, since Estonia is at the core of so many of these areas, security, citizen empowerment, the sort of larger philosophical issues of security that are discussed by the NATO Center, is that I think that despite our small size and our odd location, this is the place today for figuring out how society will continue to develop in an internet age, which is why what we want to do and are doing right now, and is that we are going to transform eGA. We will metamorphize eGA to mega. That's the metamorphized eGA, and mega meaning a much bigger thing that I would call the Global Information Society initiative, to actually get people to think far, far more about how society is changing, where it's going, how we can change it for the better, what the dangers are. And that's my hope for this, that this forum will talk about that a lot. I've already talked a lot. I did say I can answer questions, but I don't think there's time for that. No time for that. Okay, anyway, we'll see you at the coffee break. Bye.